This is Motivation. I'm Lori Joy Kingwell.
And I'm Chrissy Van. We're two dreamers on two wheels inspired by our community.
And celebrating the voices we're just lucky enough to discover along the ride. So if not already, like, subscribe, follow along, do what you gotta do to not miss an episode.
A gearbox, also known as a transmission, is a critical component of a motorcycle that adjusts the engine's power to the rear wheel, allowing the bike to move at different speeds and propel you forward. Think of your self-identity as the gearbox on your motorcycle. Just as the gearbox ensures the engine runs smoothly and efficiently by shifting into the right gear, our self-perception needs to align with our actions and words for a harmonious and effective journey through life. When we're in the right gear, everything flows seamlessly. But if we're out of sync, the ride can become jerky and unpredictable. Are the stories we tell ourselves congruent with the real person navigating the gears? In this episode, we'll explore how to align our self-identity with our actions and words, ensuring that the ride we take is authentic and true to who we are. You'll learn how to recognize when your self-identity is out of sync with your actions, strategies for shifting your inner gearbox to stay true to your values, the significance of self-congruence for mental and emotional well-being, and by the end of the episode, you'll be equipped with tools to ensure that the journey through life is not just smooth, but genuinely fulfilling. This is the Motivation.
Okay, we are talking congruence today. And why we're talking congruence is, so this past weekend, I turned 40 years old. And one of the things that I was doing leading up to it was asking random people, did they have any advice? You know, people that obviously were older than 40, were in their 50s and up. Do you have any advice? What would you kind of give to somebody that yourself or somebody going into 40 of like, yeah, I wish I would have known this in this little piece. And this woman, and Chrissy was alongside me with this, and this woman said, just relax, just relax, stay relaxed, be relaxed in life and stuff. This woman was anything but relaxed. Even the way she said it was almost like spitting it at us. Now,
it was the most tense relax I've ever seen in my life.
Tense relax. Now, to be fair, well, I don't know if this is fair as much as this is just more context, because this should have made her more relaxed. We were dressed up as our elder alter egos. So we were dressed to the nine, to say the least, in our these get-ups and our outfits. But that usually brings about the fun in people. It did not for her. Her husband was like, thought this was great. If anything, her husband was relaxed. That was the person that was chill. And she was not. And so we were kind of laughing about it of like, what's the irony of this person, you know, that being their advice, yet they couldn't be further from it in how they showed up. And this got us kind of on this thought pattern of congruency. And what we're going to really talk about today is kind of our own, but how even in the past, I know for myself, of like who I thought I was, like the value systems or habits that I thought would describe me in my day-to-day life when I really took inventory or when I really looked clearly, it didn't. And I think so often, more times than not, on one kind of tipping point of the scale to another, people aren't that congruent to who they think they are. On that kind of like pendulum swing, that's a better way to maybe put it, is like you either have the one side of it where you think, you know, like, oh, I'm very much these things. I'm very kind. I'm a healthy person. I'm all of these things. But then when you actually looked at your day-to-day life, not a lot of that actually aligns, right? Maybe you're a bit rude or chippy or choppy because things didn't go your way at the grocery store line, or you think you're a really healthy person, but like you don't really ever exercise outside of walking to your car and back inside and then just plopping it on the sofa. If you really looked at your intake of food and nutrition, not that healthy. So you kind of overextend what you think you are. And then you look on the other side of the things and you might think that, you know, be really, really hard on yourself. And you don't give yourself the credit that you're due. And actually, most people, we kind of live on the fringes of both these sides. No one's really one or the other, but we're rarely in the middle where we're actually honest with ourselves. And we really look at like, does what I value and does my view of myself actually match up with my day-to-day behavior, with my actions and my habits? Because also a lot of our lives, we're like, well, why does this keep happening to me? Or why does my life keep going in this direction? And it doesn't make sense to us because we think it along the lines of, this doesn't make sense to who I think I am. But if you really got honest and you really took inventory, it actually makes perfect sense. And so that's what we're talking about today, is congruency in and how that affects all of our lives, what we can do to start to get honest with ourselves with grace and love. But honest, like let's look what we're working with here. And then where do you go from there? What can you implement? What are some techniques that you can do to move forward? And obviously we'll sprinkle our own bullshit in there, as we always do.
Naturally, that's going to happen. But I'm sure there's probably a lot of people listening and thinking, well, how could I not be what I tell myself? I know who I am. I know me best. I hang out with me most. But there really is that beautiful ability of the mind to create this cognitive dissonance in ourselves, maybe a bit of denial in there if what is reality is something we're really doubling down and trying hard not to look at about ourselves. And that can happen so often. To give like the lightest example of this would be as if I said I'm a very tidy person. And I truthfully believed I was a very tidy person. When I host people and they come into my home, things are spotless in my place. Absolutely. Because I can rage clean like nobody's business. But if we were to dial back and look at my daily habits, if I finish a meal, my dish is probably landing on the side of the couch that I sat on. And I discarded this pair of pants because I change 4 times in a day. And those are sitting on the floor. And all those little habits end up stacking up. And all of a sudden, I have a messy condo that's in front of me, therefore making me a messier individual. That would be the reality. But it'd be very different if all of a sudden I'm hanging out with everyone. And they're like, your place looks lovely. Da, da, da. And I was like, yeah, I just keep it spotless. I just keep it spotless because there's maybe shame that I am not this squeaky clean individual 100% of the time. So that's kind of like a reverse example of what we're talking about. If I wanted, however, to become a tidy individual, and I know, Lori, you did this. I think correct me if I'm wrong, it was like after you read Atomic Habits or something like this, because you said that you were a little bit on the messier side before.
Oh, on the messier side is a understatement. It was way before Atomic Habits. It was in my 20s. I was like, it always just looked like a bomb went off behind me when I went through a room.
Which definitely creates a lot more stress. And eventually for you were like, enough is enough. And the only way to change that, enough is enough, is not that one day that I would spend getting everything ready to host a party. It is all in those tiny habits and foundations. Eventually, Lori being a tidy person did become part of your identity because it comes through in all of your daily habits. When you grab something, you're putting it away. When you dispose of something, you're throwing it out. It sounds so simple, but imagine those same habits and rituals in our daily life that create who we are on larger scales. Because you can see just through that example alone, it can have a profound difference on how things actually look, how you actually feel.
I love that you mentioned the part where you're like, we all show up when the crowds are watching, when the eyes are on us. Then we show up in those ways that we identify as. Because if you didn't identify as a tidy person in some way, you wouldn't give a shit what your house looked like when people came over. Maybe a little bit, just because of like the social ideas and norms of like, you tidy for company, But that's such a big one of like the performative in all areas of our lives, that we show up so that person or those people or society considers us those things, those that we value. And I want to make sure that they, because that is our mirror of whether we've accomplished or we are that thing. But that's actually not it, because that's not authentic. It's that, who are you? What do you do when the eyes aren't on you? And there's no one giving you the pat on the back, and there's no one acknowledging you. And that was I was very much, raised in a home where it was like around perfectionism. So I almost repelled it
Yeah.
because it was done. So it was like, see, I do good, right? I do good. I'm doing good, right? I do good versus like, and obviously there was a lot of it too where you just felt better. Like I grew up in a home that was not where you couldn't sit on the sofa because there was that room. Like we didn't grow up there in that kind of a context, but like our home always was tidied unless I came through a room, but then mom would go behind me and tidy and so forth. Is the point being is that I didn't really make a lot of the connections until much later in life, how much of my behavior was driven behind the pats on the back and looking as though I had it all together versus it doesn't actually matter whether you have it all together or don't have it together. It's what value does it actually bring to your life? How does it actually make you more calm or peaceful? Or does this give you, do you procrastinate less? Like the one thing, I was such a procrastinator. And I thought of myself as someone that got things done. But if I really looked at it, I spent way more time procrastinating and doing odd job shit that didn't actually matter to avoid doing the things that mattered. And because honestly, it was like, I didn't like the discomfort of doing things that were hard for me because that meant then I wasn't good enough. Like it was just this like tally of things and it wasn't congruent with who I thought I was. And then I always kind of wondered why I was always feeling behind or always feeling at a loss and discombobulated and all those different things. And then when I realized that I was with procrastination, let's say, that I was paying numerous prices for the same thing. So it was like something that I found like a little bit stressful. I was stressing over it about 10 to 12 times every time I thought of having to do it, or every time I had to, and then that stress got bigger because all of a sudden the avoidance got bigger. And I realized like how insane that was when you really thought about it.
And expense reports.
Right. And so it was one of those things where like pay one price. Like you got to pay the price no matter what, pay the piper, just pay the goddamn piper and it's done. And it was actually rather than like, okay, you don't want to be a procrastinator because that's, you don't want to be that person because when I had it in and around how that made me look or the idea of me that I wanted to give off, that's where there's too much wiggle room and there's lack of congruency because you're not actually doing it to help yourself. You're doing it to avoid the shame of the outside world and perception and performative. And so once I started actually being like, just help yourself, just be on your goddamn team. And that was those ways that I became a tidy person. I became and there's still moments like if I'm really overtired, you'll see it like trickles of me behind me sort of thing. But for the most part, like every morning, I make the bed, I make up so I make sure that the environment is clean and cleared and appeasing so I can focus. But it's that so much of it used to only be about really cleaning before company came because I wanted to make sure that I looked in a way that people were like, she's got it together. And I didn't. And that in itself is like, again, where for somebody that had it together, well, then why was I a hot mess everywhere else? But I like the idea that people had the idea of me having it together,
Well, the perfectionism piece is something, and we've talked about it before, that I relate to so much, being just under that pressure all the time. I mean, we were from little kids, you go to a restaurant and constantly complimented because we were almost downright regal to how we would put our little napkins down and the forks and this, that, and the other. And it would just be constant rewards for showing up in this very polished behavior.
Yeah.
And the thing that I like that you highlight the most is that the change didn't really happen for you until you realized, A, the chaos that you were creating in your own life to a large degree and the price that you were paying. But also when you have that moment of stepping back and being like, why wouldn't I just do this for myself? Like at the end of the day, that is who all of these steps should be. And also having to draw a light to the fact, why am I lying to myself? Perhaps that's the bigger question. Why am I lying to myself over who I am when it doesn't line up with what I do?
big part of the why too for so many of us is these uncomfortableness. Like there's also that part where, let's say for somebody that they value something, let's say they value that they think that they're an optimist, but they actually always are looking at the things that aren't working and the things that, they're not happy about. But they're looking at that and like, I say someone like that was me. This anonymous person.
Yeah.
Always would have considered myself, I've spoke about before, is like having deep depression. And I knew that I had a very dark lens at which I viewed life in certain aspects. But if you genuinely said outside of that, how do you view things? And I would very much have thought myself as an optimist. And yes, in many ways I was, but there was a lot of ways that I wasn't. Like, again, you're not all or nothing. There's a reason I thought I was an optimist. But what I noticed is the parts of myself that saw what wasn't working or saw myself as a victim, oh, they treat me this way, or they did this to me, or they shouldn't have done this. And then I would ruminate on it. And I ended up practicing that quite a bit. That ended up becoming more of my habit. So at one point when I really was honest with myself and recognized, I don't think you're that much of an optimist anymore. Not percentage wise over being a, pessimist or negative or half glass, half empty. But we hold back from that because we have to take responsibility. And we as people want to avoid that discomfort feeling, right? Like everything in our biology wants to avoid those feelings as well. But that's actually where all of your power is, because that's where your authenticity is. That's where your alignment is. That's where you get to start to say, like, well, what do I value, right? Like, what do I value? Who do I want to be? Well, what would that actually look like? Because who you want to be and the life that you want to live has got to be aligned with action, or it will never exist. It can't be done. You have to get pragmatic about it, but we avoid it because it can be really painful and then frustrating, because you really have to cultivate that grace. It takes time. And now that I notice that I'm victimizing myself, now that I notice that I'm judging, now that I notice that I'm cultivating this negative viewpoint, every time it crops up, because that's my habit, I'm like, oh, you did it again. Well, if you want a different outcome, you can't do this anymore. And then you're like, chill the fuck out, man. It's going to take some time. You've got a habit around this. And so not only does it not feel good when you really get honest and look at it, but this is where, like, even the practice that we're going to talk about a little bit further down the line here, but is like going into the taking inventory, first and foremost, doing a practice of grace with self. So you're not just going into the, kind of like willy-nilly with it. You really kind of go into it getting honest with yourself, already, saturated in a place of grace, because you almost have to go into it from a neutral spot, not judgment, of like, all right, what do I do when somebody gives me feedback that I don't like? What do I actually do? What do I actually think? And then what do I actually do? What do I actually do when someone says something to me that, I don't really agree with or doesn't feel good? What do I actually do? It's not about the whether or not I agree with them or don't agree with them. What is the aftermath? What is the thought processes? But if you go into it almost like an observer of yourself, it's so much easier, because it is tough. It is tough because you have to get honest with yourself. But if you're honest with yourself, at least you have a real deal starting point. Otherwise, life just keeps happening to you and you keep being, well, it's not, you're creating it, but you feel like it is, because you're like, well, this isn't the life that I'm trying to lead. And you're like, yeah, but your actions would say something very different when you look from an outside perspective.
Yeah, this is to get very personal, but such a good example of my current status in life when it comes to that cognitive dissonance or denial of really looking at your situation. Because here's the thing. The calendar goes really fast. I mean, at time of recording, we're already into the middle of the year of
Bananas,
2024,
hey?
right?
Bananas,
So it's
yes.
like, how often are you looking at your day to day? How many days do you actually remember from this year where you're like, that day really counted? Because we discount the fact they all count and they all add up and they're all propelling us to wherever we're going in the future. Not that we have a
Absolutely.
guarantee of that, but it is the way the equation works. And if you listen to our last episode, as you know, I was with my partner for 20 years. We are currently separated. Blindsiding, all of it. Great episode. Go backwards if you have to,
Check it out.
because I do feel like there were some solid takeaways that I'm sure I'll return and listen to.
Imagine
That
if there's the listeners and they're like, they didn't get that episode, and all of a sudden they're like, "Scourge, what?"
right.
Like, whoa, whoa, whoa.
I mean, I did
But,
say toward the beginning, I was like, don't worry, guys, my life is still a hot fucking mess. But no one was more surprised than I. However, now we're in this process of really looking at the relationship and where things were at and what that looked like on the daily. And I won't share too much, but like for my other half side, there are some significant mental health components that they are dealing with, like on a large scale. And there were many things that they weren't looking at because in their life, if you asked them, all the time they would say, I don't get fussed by what's happening in the world. I don't understand why people do. I live in this like land of it rolls off of me, which was not fact. And even for myself and how I participated or things that I don't want to say accepted in the relationship, but I guess to a degree, things that I want or need that weren't being met, I also allowed that to just keep calm, carry on. And if anybody asked me, we had the picture perfect everything love story, right?
yeah.
But when you start to actually take those painful audits, now I can't help but look at things that maybe my needs weren't being met or certain areas that I wasn't showing up in the best way. And for them, they're doing just as significant, if not more, because they're just starting to do the work that they have never, ever decided to do in life. But having to take a good, healthy look at themselves and say, what's not serving me here? Because it's really fucking not serving me. And so on a very large emotional example, I just wanted to speak to how painful it can be, how shame will crop up, how you will judge yourself. The amount of times, and I even like my therapist had to stop me in it because I said, I just feel so stupid because I thought I was X and I'm not. I thought we were X and we're not. And I just feel so stupid. And he's just like, that's not the case at all. But like also there is this amazing gift of deciding I don't want to do things the same way. But in order to accomplish that and move through it, it's not going to be easy. And also just like any habit change that we make in our life, the future of what that looks like can't be guaranteed, but we can choose how we participate and influence what that looks like. The work doesn't start with them as the partner. The work starts with me, because that's the other thing. A lot of times when we're disjointed with who we identify as and we realize we don't, it's very easy to look external and say, they're why, that's why, this job's why, and look at everything else instead of actually going inwards to ourselves and digging deep at that stuff that does suck to look at. It does. But if you don't, to Lori's point, you'll just keep going down the same path that isn't serving you. Or you're going down the same path that could be serving you so much better than it is. You're robbing yourself of so much if you don't actually pump the brakes and decide to evaluate. And this is the other part. I do think if you have any ounce of anxiety in your soul, and I get that it can crop up in our day-to-day for a myriad of reasons, but if there is a persistent anxiousness, listen to it. The solution probably lies in something that you're doing day in, day out. I can almost guarantee it.
Yeah, we kind of have gotten so blanketed with saying things like, I'm depressed, or I'm anxious, or I'm this, or I'm that. And even though they're exceptionally real from someone that, experienced them, exceptionally real. But from what I've learned and what I've always kind of believed, like instinctually believed. And then, now understanding certain levels of psychology and the, neuroscience behind and so forth, and the nervous system and this and that. It is your body speaking to you. And when there's those anxiousness, and obviously it can get where your habits only exacerbate or whatever it is, masturbate.
That's what I think of every time I hear it.
I'm gonna say
I've also been doing a lot of masturbating because I'm in the Sahara Desert of sex. But anyway,
good for you. I do anyway. So just period, just hard, love it. Is that you? Now I've lost train of thought, but in a great way. That's a good thing.
Exacerbate.
The like anxiousness and stuff. Like it goes back to that what we've spoken to before as well, where it's like life will come in with that little bit of like, essentially, I don't even say life. I say that like your psyche, your spirit's coming in with a little bit of a whisper, and you ignore it and you keep going. And then it starts to get a little louder and a little louder. And a lot of times mental illness that's a big part of it, is it's parts of you that are just aren't being, you're in denial, you're deflecting, you're projecting, you are intellectualizing, like you're doing everything you can to avoid at looking at what is the reality, as close to reality as we can grasp in life as itself that you are living, and not looking and not seeing what's congruent. And if that actually is what you want too, you know what I mean? Like you can have value systems and be very congruent that actually don't work for you. And that, because it got handed down, let's say with like culturally to you, or through, you know what I mean? Like you can also be living things that you're like, no, I'm exceptionally congruent, but this, I'm still deep in depression and anxiety. And you're like, well, that original value system, do you align with that? Is that what you want in your life? But we constantly talk about it. And I can genuinely say, as much as as honest as I can grasp, that I know of in this moment, is like Chrissy and I genuinely walk the walk and talk the talk in this, not in the context of being perfect at it or being the authority or an expert on, nothing like that. But like, I tell you, like we look at that motherfucking hard shit and we look in that goddamn mirror, and like, it is not easy. It is so worth it. It is a game changer of like I said, it's the reason I don't go into depression anymore. It's the reason I don't get overwhelmed with anxiety anymore, because I have learned how to be consistent with it through every day. And there's so many parts that I know in 10 years time, I'll be like, holy shit, folks, if we're still here talking to y'all, is like, turns out there was this and this, and I didn't know, like I wasn't congruent, or I didn't know this was a part of me. Like you said, in your marriage, I didn't know what I didn't know. But that's why it's like a completely lifelong unearthing and developing and following the breadcrumbs. And I feel as though this is one of the biggest ones when it's often with friends or family, and not in a judgmental way. It used to be in a judgmental way, but that's one of the things I had to take a long look at in the mirror, like get honest with myself, is that you couldn't be an empathetic person and be judgmental. You couldn't. And I considered myself an empathetic person, but I was like, you are really motherfucking judgy, Lori. And so I'm swearing a lot in this episode. Good for me.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah, fuck yeah. But it's like, I had to really look at that. And it's like, it's still a work in progress, but really genuinely for the most part, there's not a lot. I'm actually kind of caught off guard when I get a judgy moment. I'm like, oh, what's about that? Are you judging? Like, what does that got to do with you inside?
Yeah.
Whereas like that was my go-to, and it was like a runaway train. But point being is that when you really start to step into what is important and what does that actually look like in practice, everything improves, because you start actually getting to live the life you see for yourself, and you get to live with it in real time. Like, this is my decade of protect my peace. Like, that is what the decade I'm stepping into. And that doesn't mean that I avoid tough things or tough conversations or If someone's going through something hard, you're like, no, it's my time for peace. Like, that's just avoidant. It's not peace. But it is going, you are the only one that can allow your peace to be disrupted. And the only way that I can do that is how I view that person and how I view this conversation, and whether or not I want to be curious or whether I want to be right, whether or not I want to be judgmental or whether or not I want to be empathetic. You know what I mean? But, or also it's like recognizing if somebody is in a certain space where their energy in itself is this, like, where it's like negativity, maybe that person I need a little space from. I'll still love them from afar, but I'm going to create a little space with love. But like, that's my job, is to be as, grounded as a whole human as possible and get more and more aligned and congruent with that as every year goes by. This is a year to practice keeping my peace, because I am a person that feels deeply about things and passionately about things. And I have allowed that and encouraged that within myself to be highly disrupted. Now, it doesn't mean, again, being stoic and never getting angry or never getting annoyed. It doesn't mean any of those things either. It means knowing when it happens to step away and process it, take the wisdom on the other side and move forward, or what, you know what I mean? But it's like, if I consider myself these things, what is the next evolution of that? And man, because if you're questioning why life still feels the way it feels, and not the context when you're going through something like what you're talking about, Chrissy, or like grief, someone's passed away, like these things that are like really heavy in those moments, you're still going to be honest with what you're showing up with, but it's not going like, this is why this is happening with me because I, necessarily in those things. But at the same token, there is going to be parts that you are in that no matter what's happening, you always have power within it. Always.
There's a reason why I'm not in a hole on my bed and haven't left the house.
That's what I mean, right? Of like walking the walk and talking the talk. Like, you're in it in real time. And you are like processing, feeling it, having tough conversations, entering with love, having days where you're just pissed and you're like, I'm pissed. Watch out, everyone. If you're in my like little vortex right this minute, like, just heads up. Like, you're doing all the things, but you're doing it in a way where you're like aligning with what you value within yourself. And what more can you ask from yourself in those moments?
Yeah. And I mean, within the last 2 months, I haven't had one comfortable day. Like, they've all been highly uncomfortable. And to your point, it's exactly that. Like, something of this magnitude, there's many different ways that one could handle it. And instead, I made a commitment from the very beginning where I'm like, I'm going to feel all of it. And I've caught myself like, these changes that we want to create, whether on big or small scale, generally, if we're looking to implement that for ourselves, they don't happen in a linear fashion. It's just like healing isn't linear. Habits aren't either. So, point in case, when I had returned from the One Moto show in Portland, I had about 4 days where I felt like fucking shit, which I have been giving myself grace and allowing myself to have those moments. But this was different. And what was different were my habits, those foundations that I speak to as somebody that I've always valued exercise. I've almost been going to the gym consistently now for a solid decade to the level that I've been going, and also have participated in that longer. Nutrition. I'm somebody that meal preps and generally take a good care of my body. Really, I just have meal prep through the week, and then I'll only dine out. And then that's where things get a little crazy. That being said, those 4 days that I felt like total shit, I was binge watching shows. I didn't make it to the gym. It wasn't even that I was like eating poorly. I was hardly eating. And I actually took that zoom out view of myself. And I was like, is this a picture of somebody that's coping well and doing well in this moment? Fuck no, it's not. Who can change how this looks? Me. That's the one who's responsible for this, me and only me. And that's when the very next day I had my yoga class booked. I had my gym session booked. I made myself food for dinner. And all of a sudden I was the one climbing out of that hole. So just on that level, I just want you to understand that, to Lori's point, how saying we know we're not perfect, but it's the fact that we're willing to look at ourselves in those moments instead of doubling down and saying something sad and bad happened to me, so I'm going to just stay here and everyone should pity me for it and I'm going to pity myself for it. It's like, you're never going to grow out of that. It's that part of us, though, when you said, I know what I know now, right? So there's a
Mhm.
choice to be made there because you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
But I know what I know now. And that's the part that people get fucking stuck because they double down. Then they look at it and they're like, but it's easier to stay here because I know that. And you're just like, no, you have to trust me, like being separated has not been easy. And to a large degree, the amount of separated we are, even though getting into this wasn't my choice, where I'm at now largely is because is what I need. And I know for the other party as well, it's important for their healing. But in my sphere and what I need and knowing what I have to look at, that's the decision that I'm making. And then keeping my foundations going within that, ensure that I'm actually using this space for the personal growth that I'm intending it to be. Because otherwise, what am I doing? And so that's where
Mhm.
you're kind of like, your foundations ultimately add up to bring you to better places if you are using them for positive. Because again, with the magnitude of what transpired, I could just be under my blankets in my bed every day. That's an option. And truthfully, if I took that option, I think a lot of society would be like, well, yeah, that tracks. Like, do that. There would be no air of concern. Not the company I keep. That being said, I'm surrounded by people
Right?
that are very into personal growth and will challenge you on your bullshit if you're subscribing to it. Thank fucking God. But there's a lot of circles that would be like, man, let's go drink every day and let's go this. And you're just like, no, you have to make the choice. And because of that, I've been able to work to a relatively strong level, which was surprising. I am feeling healthy in my body, like all those other elements. So I know I went on a bit of a tangent there, but I'm just like, it's funny when I entered this conversation, I didn't really think there would be as many parallels on such a personal level of where things are at now, but it just goes to show how impactful the daily really is. 365 days. Think how fast they fucking go. The opportunity is in every single one of them. And it's just like when we talk about nutritious food and working out, if you are consistent, that's where the results lie. There is nobody, I truly, because I hear this sometimes, I do my workouts and I do this and I never see changes. Well, science, like if we actually drill it down, maybe you have to look and do things a little bit differently. Like what you're doing might not be exactly what's right for you if that's what you're aiming for. And so it's just constantly asking yourselves the question of, is this serving the vision that I have for myself? Is this serving who I want to identify to be? And if there is a misalignment or a discrepancy there, exploring why, and then actually putting into action the changes required. It doesn't have to be drastic. Like that's what Lori, you and I talk about all the time. These aren't
It's
grandiose
actually better if it's
decisions.
not drastic. It'll probably serve you to get clear and then scaffold. So you start off small and every week or day, you just add a little bit more, a little bit more, and a little bit more in that direction of whatever that looks like. You know, when I was in my deep negativity and I was at my most judgy, is I would go and I mentioned this at maybe a couple of years ago in one of our first episodes around something, I don't know, but I would go sit on the bench and watch the people in the park. And I would just watch individuals and I would follow them with my eyes and I would think of like, do they have a family at home? Do they have a this? What's going on with them? And I would just like send them empathy. So I would just practice having empathy for other human beings on the bench in that moment rather than judging them because I'm like, why are you wearing those shoes with those pants? That is no bueno. Like, you know,
That's a choice.
that's a choice. But like if you ever, any year that you've known me, on the outside, no one would ever say that like I was an unloving person or
Mhm.
you know what I mean? Again, it's not black and white, one or the other. But when I looked at how I felt about people more often than not in my head, even if I wasn't saying it out loud. And what I think is how I feel is how I behave then too. And so again, it always comes with like, what can you do? And here we're going to we'll go into our motivation maintenance in a minute, but even just things like,
I started
right,
to sing.
oh
I
no,
was like,
that's why I said it and didn't
never
sing
mind.
it. I didn't want to throw you
I
off.
was so disappointed too. I was like, why
I
is
know
she
you're
here
right.
giving
Why
a
is
shitty
it?
rap?
Yeah. When do you ever rush that, Lori? We sing together as a team. Well, I guess, well, this kind of is a motivation maintenance, I guess. So let's do it. Motivation maintenance. That was supposed to be a timbre. So this is kind of a little bit of a two-parter. So you can, I'm sure there's a gazillion blogs that they've written about this. If you even just go to AI and you wrote in of like reflective questions to ask myself so I'm more congruent to who I want to be and how I act in the world. Like you can get it anywhere, but here's just something to get your mind moving in that direction is like writing down and getting really clear on like, who do I think I am? And then I want you to write all the behaviors that you do in a day-to-day life that align with those. And then I want you to write the ones that you likely do on a day-to-day, being in traffic. What are you saying to the other drivers? Being in the grocery line. Are you huffing and puffing because the grocer lady's having a conversation with the woman in front of you and you want to get gone? And like, take inventory of all of the actions that aren't congruent with that value system or who you want to be. If you think you're a healthy person, like, I'm healthy. Or I'm a good partner to my spouse or whoever you're with. Well, what do you do? What does it look like that you are a good partner? What do you do kind things? Do you show your appreciation? If you're healthy, what do you feed yourself? What do how, because like me, like sometimes I get out of control with my desserts because I'm a sugarholic and I'll just be like, well, it's just my dessert. I ate healthy all day. And you're like, yeah, but you had like half a chocolate bar. That can't be great for your and it's terrible for your brain. It's terrible for you. And so it was like, okay, well, I'm going to eat my chocolate, but okay, well then have your one square. But it's that kind of thing of like, you just get in a habit of it. You don't really think about it, but it's like, well, what behaviors are aligned and what aren't? Like to actually take inventory. One of the other ones is a close friend or a couple of really close friends that know you well and you can trust in this kind of vulnerable space. Ask them, is there parts of me that aren't very congruent? Or ask yourself, ask out loud, like, I think of myself as this. What parts of that are congruent and what parts of that have you seen? And know that it's probably not going to feel good, but that's okay. And that doesn't feel good for them to share it either. But that's a space in which can really help you along. And then you can also ask for support if you need be with them in that. And also challenge your assumptions. Like look at things that you think of other people or other cultures or other races or all those different things that you subconsciously or consciously think, and challenge them to be like, well, where did I gather that from? Why is that more predominant than this? Where did that, even things where the type of places that you shop, where you put your money, challenge the way that you think, or at least start to mull over, because your actions, that's where you're putting your money. That's where you're putting your time. And so if you have a belief system in something, but then you're not congruent, and it doesn't mean that it has to be all or nothing. So it doesn't also mean that it's like, well, you're a hypocrite if you don't, because it's not for other people. It's for you. But you ask yourself of like, why does that mean something to me? Am I showing up in actionable steps that align with that? Where am I not? Do I want to change that? Where do I begin with that? And write out questions. Like I just pulled this off of AI within seconds before we hopped in. Things like
best assistant,
right? What are my core values and beliefs? And do my actions align with them? How do I perceive myself in various roles as a family member, as a coworker, as a friend, as a partner? And do others see me similarly? Like, do they actually see you the same way as you see yourself? And why is their viewpoint different? what motivates my behavior in different settings. Your example was perfect. I get really tidy and clean when company is coming. That's what motivates my tidiness, is other people. So it's like, what motivates me and why is that the motivator? And so if that's something that you want to keep as a tidy person, how do you create a motivator that keeps you tidy more often? And for me, that was my sanity of like not feeling completely erratic in myself and being like, oh my God, all the things I need to do. That was constantly reminding me of how behind I was in the things that I needed to do, sort of thing. So just that of like, take that time. This kind of work has been one of the biggest ways that I started that kind of evolution way back when. And parts of myself that only, like you guys know me as, if you knew me back in the day, always late, always like just always like a half hour late, not a little bit late, always late. I'm almost never late now. And almost to the point where I actually have an issue about it because I get anxious if I'm even slightly, or if someone else is late, I get anxious. But here's the thing. It's like you can transform who you are where it's not working for you in a way that you changes how you live your life for the better and just for an overall better well-being.
I mean, that was so good. It's almost impossible. I should have gone first. Should have gone first. Yeah, that GPT 4. And now they're more emotional one. I'm not going to lie. AI was my therapist for like the first month because it took a month till I started therapy. And I quite honestly would be like, is it normal to feel da da da? And then it would creepily give me the best advice ever and be like, would you like to continue talking? I'm here for you. And I was like, this has gotten crazy, but yes, I would. Mine's going to be pretty quick and dirty here, but it's something that we didn't speak to so much in the podcast, but is highly relevant to self-identity and kind of drilling down how you want to show up in your life. And it's just being cognizant of the influence of social media and how much that is shaping who you want to be, who you are, how you identify.
Thank you for saying this out loud.
Yeah, because it's a big one that a lot of us spend a lot of time in the space. I know a really good example of this would be friends that are mums. And I know the pressure that they experience to be showing up in a certain facet because that's the only one that's being displayed on social media to them. And if they do not show up like this, they are therefore less than and inadequate. And that becomes the stories that they're telling themselves. So you get kind of the picture that I'm trying to paint here in all these different levels of life. Social media really opens up the arena for comparison and also can distort a perception that we're trying to create for ourselves. So really, and I know you and I actually, I think, did an episode either specifically or talked about it greatly about when you are moving into those spaces. The thing is, it's like so habitual for everyone. Most people aren't entering and being conscientious about it, unfortunately. And I think that's a big habit to break, but actually be conscientious about your social media consumption and how it's impacting your perception of self, the world around you, because the term influencer is something you hear, and shout out to them because they make fucking bank. So I have nothing against it. But at the end of the day, everything you are seeing is influencing you. So just be aware of that is my motivation maintenance. Really, it's like actually create space between yourself and those spaces because you're sitting in a waiting room, you're waiting at a dinner table, you are waking up in the morning before you go to bed while you're watching TV at the same time. How often are you mindlessly consuming this? You got to think about it.
I'm so glad that you mentioned this because it is so important, is because you have all these people telling you what you should be valuing, what you should be prioritizing, and then giving the unrealistic directions as to how to get there. So much of it is like, does that actually mean something to you? Why do you value it? Is that a healthy way to view life or a relationship? And what's the middle ground on that? Because again, you really are seeing the extreme version of it. And
often not even the real version of it. with
Yes.
tools that are out there.
Yes, there's a book I'm reading right now. I highly recommend it. I think it's just called Unsubscribe. It's got a green cover. I could grab it really quick. Let me grab it really quick so I can say the title.
Anticipation.
It's called Please Unsubscribe. Thanks. How to take back our time, attention, and purpose in a world designed to bury us in bullshit. And the
Nice.
author is Julio Vincent Gambudo.
That's a fun. Julio.
It is. It's fantastic. Essentially, the first part of the book, he like walks you through how everything, the economy and now social media and how it's been set up essentially to bombard you and infiltrate you with information and influence and to get you spending and collecting and accumulating, and how it's this runaway train, and essentially of like how to get back your time and obviously unsubscribe, but there's more to it, but it's like it's really, really good.
I really need to get on this motivation book club. It will come to the motivation.com because I'm like, there's just so many good.
There's so many good ones. Yeah. All right. Quote. Do you want to go first or do you want me to go first?
Ooh, this actually like leans a little bit. I will just go. Some people try very hard to impress others, but in the bargain, lose their own identity. I just kind of grabbed this one because it jumps out at me as the whole cleaning parade thing. You clean the place to impress the others. It's not tied to your why when the rest of your life is a fucking mess. It's like, just think about your why, people.
Yeah. And also, like, even just that of try it where someone's coming, and if your house wasn't really clean prior, let it. See what happens. See the discomfort of like them being like, oh, like no one really cares.
Totally.
Not really. And they have like 2 seconds of it. If you were going to or clean it, but like see what, obviously there's a difference. Like give your toilet a scrub. Like we don't need to be sitting on someone's gross shit, but as a company. But outside of like the tidy, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, it's so funny because that's the first thing I always do when company comes. I'm like, clean the toilet.
Absolutely.
Right. But it's, but just the tidiness of it all, like see what happens. You'll never come to my house. Let's be real clear. Cause like, I'm like, I can't even handle it. Again, it's almost neurotic now. It's taking a hard left for sure. Swung way too far on the other pendulum. But I don't have clean bathrooms often. That's only for company.
For your own interpretation. That's why.
Actually, Dave, I remember years ago, I'm clean now, but he'd be like, you're more of a tidy person and clean. Like he's like, there's dust and this, but like you won't find the bed's made, this, but I'm just like, but that takes like a lot of time for a deep scrub. All right. When your actions are congruent with who you want to be in life and what you think you should be doing and achieving, then you start to have a stronger internal constitution. You feel more grounded, responsible, and sure, and a new level of harmony and steadiness enters your life, and you feel proud of who you are and how you interact with the world. You barely blink in an unsteady and uncertain world because you find steadiness and certainty within. Life becomes yours.
Oh, and that, my friends,
Hey, here's your motivation.
Ooh. You've just listened to the Motivation Podcast with your host, Chrissy Van, and me, Lori Joy Kingwell.
Thanks for joining us along the ride. We've got new episodes dropping every Monday, and we're all about community. So follow us on Instagram at Motivation Podcast and visit our website at themotivation.com.
And in the meantime, tanks full and full throttle.